Yes, thank you so much, Peter. So we've been doing these webinars. This is our sixth webinar, and we're very happy to have Rihanna here. So we started doing these Agile talks to promote Agile women in Agile, and have the women in Agile, giving them a chance to actually speak their minds and talk about these exciting topics like the one that we have here today. Rihanna and I, we met many months ago. She reached out to me on LinkedIn, and we met for a coffee, and we connected right away. And I love her enthusiasm. I love her personality. I loved her passion for Agile, and we were so like we were so engaged together. And we said we need to do something together at some point. And here we are. We are doing this webinar together. She's a director for BMO, as you know, and she's been also doing some work in the Agile leadership and coaching world, which is great, helping organizations and communities build a growth mindset. Amazing. And in her spare time, she likes to play badminton. And that's what we were talking about, that we love to play badminton. So we'll get a chance to play together in next summer, maybe. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Rihanna. So Rihanna, what made you think about organizational physics, and what is this? Like, I'm so excited to hear about more.
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Peter. I'm super excited as well. And I must say, when I met Joanna, it's true. I just loved, having that conversation with her and her attitude. And I've met Peter just now recently, and I absolutely love his attitude too. So I think they're both amazing, and I'm super excited about today. So I'll start sharing my screen. Just give me one moment. And to answer your question, what got me into physics and organizational physics? So first of all, thank you so much, everybody, for joining. I'm honored to be conversing with all of you today. And when I was in my first year of engineering, I remember my first physics class, and almost everyone failed the midterm. I barely passed, right? Barely. And rumors were that this is one of the ways in which they would weed out stronger students from the weaker ones, right? Like, that was the thing. And you're probably now wondering, okay, so Rihanna, if physics is so difficult, why are you still learning it? Well, what can I say? I love physics so much that even that midterm failure couldn't get me to stop liking it. I spent extra hours trying to simplify concepts and, making it easy so that I could learn it, to the point where I started tutoring it in my second year so I could help the first year students learn it better. And I even started playing cricket. And for those of you who know the game, it's similar to baseball. There's a lot of conversations about momentum and physics in that. So I just couldn't stop myself. Physics is everywhere. And even after I started working in the Agile space, I couldn't help but wonder, how does physics play a role in our work environment, right? Physics is one of the most fundamental scientific disciplines, and its main goal is to understand how the universe behaves. Physics is likely one of the oldest academic disciplines, and through its inclusion of astronomy, perhaps the oldest discipline overall. And so given that, it's actually quite amazing how physics has been minimally explored in its impact to organizational behavior and structure. Being an engineer and a very, very curious person by nature, I couldn't help but explore how the laws of physics impact the maturity of Agile and the organizational culture. And that's why we're here today. Today, specifically, I wanted to take a look at the second law of motion and how that connects us to momentum. Newton's second law of motion specifically states, right, that the net force that applies on a particular object or a system is a product of the mass and acceleration that the system has. So basically, unless there is a net force, a net external force, there will be no acceleration, no change in velocity for any object or team. So you're probably wondering, how does this relate to Agile? Well, have you ever wondered why Agile uses the term velocity and not speed? There is a clear distinction in physics between the two terms. Velocity is a vector and speed is a scalar. So the difference between vectors and scalars is that vectors are scalars with a direction, right? So there's an additional component to it. And so when you look at your Agile teams, you're thinking about their velocity. So you can't just look at it as a scalar. You can't think of just the number. You also have to think about the direction, right? More than the numerical value at which something's moving. Think about the teams we work with and how often we have found everyone to be working super hard, but not achieving the desired productivity. Maybe the team is spending a lot of effort and working with speed, but in the wrong direction. They spend time navigating infrastructural barriers instead of building the right product for the customer. And many, many large enterprises generally have speed. They do, trust me, they do. But their perceived velocity is low because of directional issues. They have high human power, but they end up with little meaningful output. So today you're going to see me use speed and velocity as very different terms. They're not interchangeable, at least not in physics, right? And so how does that connect to momentum? Now, I'm sure you've all heard the momentum word used loosely in many of your conversations. You know, we hear, we must keep the momentum going. We must not lose the momentum on this project. Well, actually, momentum is a very scientific word. And in physics, it's described as the property that a moving object has due to its mass and motion. So really, it's a product of mass and velocity, right? So I'm one person, right? Let's say I weigh 50 kilograms, my mass is 50. If I'm moving at 2 kilometers per hour, my momentum would be 50 multiplied by 2, 100, okay? One of the most powerful laws in physics is the conservation of momentum. So what that means is the total momentum before an event is equal to the total momentum after an event. And you can think of an event like a collision or an explosion, right? So in simple terms, think about when you add a new member to a team. It's kind of like a perfectly inelastic collision. I won't nerd out on it, I promise. But really, the Tuckman model of group development, right? The form, norm, storm, perform, it has a basis in physics. Think about a project when it's running behind and you decide to add a new person to the team so they can help move things along faster. Really, what that means is before the collision, the person is outside the team, and after the collision, they're inside the team. And what the law of conservation of momentum tells us is that the momentum before they're added to the team will be the same as the momentum after they're added to the team. So let's do some math today to see what our final velocity is. Well, you came to a physics talk, so I hope you knew you were going to do some math, right? So let me walk you through the scenario, okay? You have a team today with 10 people. That's your current team's mass. And your current pace of work for those 10 people is 10 work items per week, right? They finish 10 things and you know, maybe that's not good enough, or there's another person and you think maybe it's time to add them to the team. So you add one more person to the team. Now, before that person was added, on their own, they could actually produce 10 work items per week. Now, I know that's a bit unreasonable. How could one person produce the same amount of work as an entire team? But let's just take it as a best case scenario, right? It's unrealistic, but this person is a super high performer, my top-notch high star, you know, they're the one who can come in and magically solve everything, right? We always have that one person. So let's assume that before they joined the team, they used to be able to produce 10 work items. Now you've got this new team, right? You've got a new team of 11 team members. What do you think the new velocity will be? So I'm going to ask all of you to go to menti.com. You can go on your phone, on your browser. If you have the app, you can go on the app and you can use the code 3031851. It's right on the top of the screen. And just enter in what you think the velocity will be. So I'll give you guys a minute or so.
As you're doing this, just as a reminder, if you have any questions or anything, please put them into the chat room. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. We are going to just save the questions to the end of Rihanna's presentation, but please enter them in the chat group if you do have any. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
I love it when you can put the polls live. You can see how people are answering. It's great. Don't be shy. Obviously, everyone's got one answer, so.
Yeah. Also, I'm loving that some people have their cameras on. Thank you. I can see you. And I love it when you smile when I say something. Hey, Mark. All right. So with that, it seems like there's a tie between 11, 9, and 10. You can still keep answering if you'd like, but I will share the answer with you. All right. So actually, the equation of how you have or calculate linear momentum conservation is as follows. So the first mass multiplied by the first velocity added to the second mass multiplied by the second velocity will give you the final velocity with the total mass. And in this case, your velocity actually will not change. It will stay at 10, exactly at 10. Now, of course, in this case, I had the numbers perfectly placed, so it would give you the same velocity. But you can put any combination of numbers here. And each time, the velocity will not be an addition of the previous two. It will always be lower. So something somewhere is always lost when we add more people to a team. So now that we know, and physics proves, that adding more people to a team doesn't just translate into a higher speed, what does, right? How can we increase momentum and velocity? So earlier, I was talking about how the second law of motion tells us that a change in velocity cannot happen unless there's external force, right? The acceleration is directly proportional to the external net force. And as a reminder, I want to specifically state how velocity is, again, a vector, right? It's a combination of speed and direction. And I love what David White says about speed and the fact that speed does not come from speed, right? You can't say I'm moving at, 10 kilometers an hour, so just make me move faster. You need to slow down to get the capability to speed up. You need to apply that external force, right? In order to have that speed increase. I'm sure you've heard of you need to crawl before you walk and walk before you run. And that's true, even from a physics perspective, right? So I found this to be a very interesting quote about how there's so much more than just looking at speed itself in order to increase speed. And the second piece around velocity is the direction, right? We all have the same amount of time. And why do some people feel more productive than others? It's because of that prioritization and how we spend that time. It's not just the prioritization about what feature to build next, but rather what organizational complexities to solve first. So you can build that capability to increase speed. So you can make sure that your team is utilizing all its effort and that all of its speed is in the right direction so you can have the right velocity. So I'm going to ask all of you to go to Menti again and tell me from your experience, what can increase momentum and velocity from your perspective, right? From what you've seen in the work you do. I believe each of you will be able to enter in 3 options. So how can a team increase their momentum? So take a couple of minutes and enter in what you think are some options. And then I'll share my thoughts too. We can see a nice word cloud emerging and some really nice themes coming across. I'll give everyone another minute or so you can all have a moment to put something in. Excellent. So thank you everybody for your input. This is great. Collaboration, right? Oh, there you go. Collaboration seems to be the top thing, right? Coming together and understanding what you need to do. Shared understanding, clarity, no rework, eliminating waste. All of these are such good points, right? Empowerment, all the things that we think help make a team move faster instead of adding a person to the team, right? Because we've learned that momentum will not increase simply by increasing mass. There has to be an external force there. What I find really amazing is this actually talks about how there has to be some form of shared understanding, clarity, alignment of vision. And that's actually the first point I want to talk about today. How can we increase momentum and velocity? And you'll see some of these are an amalgam of what we've seen as input from the participants today. The first thing is ensuring that the direction is clear, right? What's the mission? If you don't know what the mission is, or if you're not sure whether your team understands the mission, ask the team what their mission is. What's the vision that they're working towards? And if you hear it's to get feature out by X date, think about if that's what you would put as the tagline of your company. The company that will get the feature out by X date. Is that how you want to be known as? If so, great. If not, what is it? Is it more than that? What are we working towards, right? Make sure that's very, very clear to your team. And then once that vision is clear, you have to ensure that the team has the skills that are needed to achieve it, right? I don't think Neil Armstrong would have gotten to the moon if he didn't know anything about physics. And now that doesn't mean that you got to eliminate everybody who doesn't have the skill set. It actually means that we live in an adaptive economy. And so at the end of the day, we have to invest in our teams so they have the skill sets that are needed for today, for tomorrow, and for the day after. It's very, very important, right? You have to make sure they have the skill set that's needed for the environment that they operate in. You know, no one questions the brilliance of Einstein. And so I thought, why not use him, right, as the perfect example? Everybody's a genius, he says. But if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its entire life believing that it's stupid. And you can't have that. You can't have your teams and team members feeling that way. If you want them to be productive, you have to make sure that they have the right skill set. And if you're part of a team, you have to make your leader be more aware about the skills that are lacking so that they can help fix that. And lastly, inspect and adapt. So once your team has the skills, ensure that you're constantly evolving. And you can't just adjust and evolve if you don't get into the habit of constant feedback. Remember, we talked about Newton's second law. Unless there is a net external force, there will be no change in acceleration, no change in velocity or speed. So we talked a little bit about speed, but if you want someone to change their direction, there has to be feedback. There absolutely has to be feedback. Think about electrical circuits, right? Why do they have feedback loops with earthing wires? As soon as the voltage fluctuates, they drain the excess current for safety and stability. I won't get into the details of circuits today, but I do want to emphasize the importance of feedback. You know, Dragan in 1997 talked about how feedback is a powerful tool that allows us to design high performance circuits using components with relatively poor or uncertain parameter values. Do any of those words in green sound familiar to you? I'm sure everyone's heard their leaders talk about high performance teams. We live in a VUCA world. Things are so uncertain. We must be able to adapt. Well, there's a way to do that. Make sure that feedback is a part of your constant life cycle, right? You know, a few months ago, I did a quick informal survey with members on LinkedIn, some social media, and some of my network. And here's what I found. By the way, I hope you got a chance to read the Dilbert comic strip. It's one of my favorite ones. But yeah, how often do we receive feedback? On average, the respondents receive feedback between 60 to 70% of the time, right? So overall, you receive feedback about 60% of the time when you make a mistake. So when something needs to be corrected, right? Compared to about 70% when you did something well and you get appreciation for what you've done well. And I really want to draw your attention to that line of coworkers. So the second line, right? Which talks about how you receive feedback from your coworkers about 60% of the time when something needs to be corrected, when you've made a mistake, and about 71% when you do something well, right? When you've done something and they want you to keep that effort going in the same direction. We spend about an average of what, I think 90,000 hours of our lives at work. And that means that we probably spend more time with our teams than we do with our family. However, we receive critical feedback about 17% less. So if you look at the family line, they receive 77% feedback more when a mistake happens, when a correction is needed in behavior. So maybe it's easier to criticize your family than it is to your coworkers, or maybe it's easier to ask for feedback from your family because there's an element of trust, right? You know they'll give you feedback in their honesty. You know that you trust them. You know that they're there for you unconditionally. So maybe it's time to change that at work. And the change isn't to just start giving feedback to other people. It's also to start asking for that feedback, to being open and vulnerable, to ask for it, to go out of your way and ask your coworkers, your directs, your manager, how am I doing? What can I do better, right? And then once you've asked about yourself, reflect on yourselves as a team. What can we do better as an organization? But don't forget to pat yourselves on the back too. I mean, we clearly could also do better at appreciating each other and highlighting strengths, right? So if you look at the right column, we appreciate our family, our friends, and our coworkers just about in the 70 to 75% range. And we could always do better. We could always tell somebody that they've done a good job so they know to keep doing that, right? That's important too. And of course, it wasn't surprising to me that people got feedback the least from strangers. I think I would have been a little bit surprised if they were getting more feedback from strangers than their own family, friends, and coworkers. But this was an interesting stat for me. So as a next step, what will you do? I would like you to take a moment right now and write it down. Write it on your computer, write it on your phone, write it on a piece of paper or a sticky, like I have a few here on my wall. What will you do differently? Now that you've learned this, concept of organizational physics around momentum, around velocity, around the importance of external forces, what will you do differently? And if you'd like to have some external accountability around it, you're welcome to publish it on LinkedIn or Twitter and use the hashtag Enginealogies. And also you can share with us right now. So you can unmute and take a moment to share. We have about 5 minutes for that section before we move into questions. So I'm going to ask you to open it up and share what you think you will do differently starting today, tomorrow, next week, anytime.
I'll go first.
Sounds good.
I'm going to learn to let go even more. I think that will create momentum. I think that will create flow. And of course, it brings accountability, but I think it's going to create even more engagement.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for sharing.
I could go next. So what I would ask for is more feedback, both positive and negative. And especially for the negative, it's very important to create psychological safety so that you feel safe to give it and receive it. So I think those two would go hand in hand.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think for me, it'd be a mix of working with the organization to kind of get like the clarity to understand what the team needs to move forward and how to get alignment there. Because I think, yeah, often if there's issues with velocity in that, it's really easy to want to like have it be a personalized problem to an individual, but it's the environment around like the team, organization, clarity, and I think that is really important. And then also getting better at kind of asking and providing feedback, and then also feedback within a timely manner. So if it's say at the end of a meeting before wrapping up, asking for like feedback right then, not kind of asking for feedback a week later. Oh, how did that last meeting go? And being more timely in that way. And then being a leader, trying to set the example through my behavior of like doing this continually so that other people will hopefully start doing that as well.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Those are such good ideas. Love it. Love it. Any other thoughts? Want to our question section?
This is Nadej here. I'd say that, you know, what I'd like to do is really, what I will be doing is really be more courageous when giving feedback, but also taking the time to package the feedback in a way that it will be well received. Because like oftentimes we talk about like, you know, giving timely feedback, but also packaging in a way that the person who receives it understand that it is not coming from a bad place. It's really trying to help that person grow and grow together as a team as well. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do.
Thank you so much, Nadej, for sharing. Thank you. That was great.
I think I'll go ahead and share too that I think I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to the flow and the momentum on multiple aspects. And I actually, again, I mean, we know the crawl, walk, you know, example, but it's really paying more attention to that you can't just do it from nothing. Like you have to understand the current momentum to get to the next gear, maybe the car physics analogy. Yeah. So I'm just going to pay a little bit more attention to that, switching the gear to the next and what we need to do in our teams.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, awesome. Well, you can still share in the question section if you'd like, but I'll move us into the last part. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. Really appreciate your time. I know it's beautiful weather outside, so I do appreciate extra that you took the time today. And you know, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can book a coffee with me if you'd like, and we can open up the floor for questions now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was really great, very interesting. I certainly know from my point of view that the reinforcing this idea of velocity being speed and direction reminds me about having to always focus on doing what's the most important thing next to keep that direction going, right? So, you know, sometimes you feel like you're working hard, doing lots of stuff, but you're not getting anywhere because you're not doing it in the right direction, right? So I think that's a good reminder of that. So if anyone has any questions or anything you want to talk about, please feel free to enter them into the chat group or open up your mic. We'd love to sort of get your questions and continue this discussion for the next few minutes.
This is me again. I don't have a question, but I wanted to just recognize the talk. I think this is such a great topic, and it's such a good way of looking at it. I think this should be like required webinar for everyone in technology and business. So Rehanna, you have some work to do.
Thank you.
And I do think, we talk about science-based approach, database decisions. And of course, a lot of it is just around computer science. But I do think when it comes to the basics, we are sometimes ignorant and we forget these physics principles that apply to organizations as well. So I do think to me, it's like a brilliant, fresh way of looking at things, thinking about things, instead of, again, like adding more people to a team to speed things up. Like some of the basics, I feel like most people don't really consider the nature, the laws of the nature.
It was so interesting when you mentioned about that thought, Brianna. I go back to the when I teach, we talk about some of the basics around working teams and productivity around the Hawthorne studies and the GE light bulb factory, where they did these experiments to see about changing the working conditions. And one of their observations was when they pulled the workers off the production line, they could work faster, as you said. But when they put them back, they went back to the normal speed of the whole production line, right? So this was talked about peer pressure and so on. But, as I was listening to you speak, it's about a law of physics as well. Okay, so maybe to start off with some of the questions, Brianna, one of the things that you did talk about was about feedback and how important it is to get feedback. And I certainly have found in my career, it's really hard to get critical feedback from people. So do you have any suggestions of how you can set things up to get better quality feedback from your team members or your friends or your family, as you mentioned?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll start off with 2 resources for those who like to read or want to hear some podcasts. There's one book called Radical Candor. I think that's a brilliant book, but in conjunction with Marshall Goldsmith's Feed Forward. So I'll ask you to maybe look at those 2 as good resources to look at giving feedback in an effective way and almost changing it to a feed forward direction. So that's one piece. The other thing I'll say is it's obviously hard to get and give critical feedback specifically. And I find one of the ways to make it easier for everybody is to make it feel like business as usual. Make it feel like the norm, right? So Mark mentioned psychological safety earlier. So creating that space within your team, within your organization, where feedback is seen as a positive thing. I've often heard the term being used, it's a gift, right? Something that comes to you and you can be happy to receive it instead of feeling, sad about it or feeling that you haven't done something right. Think about what Agile offers in terms of its frameworks, right? Some of the frameworks talk about a retrospective, looking at how you've been doing together as a team and how you can do better. So that's something that if you normalize, people will always know it's okay to talk about how things went, and it's okay to talk about what we could do better. The other thing is customer feedback, right? Making it normal for you to hear about your product or service from the customer. If we can make that a normal practice around what Yasmin was saying with data and analytics and finding ways to make that part of the norm. Well, we released something today. A week later, we have a good analysis of what worked and what didn't. Okay, what can we do better? Just make it feel normal. And the third piece is performance, right? Making sure that performance reviews aren't happening once a year or twice a year, but that it's a constant conversation and not just performance of a manager giving feedback to the employee, but all around, right? Anybody should be comfortable giving feedback about performance to anybody else, whether it's you telling your manager, your style's not resonating with me, and maybe you could micromanage me a bit more because I'm new to this company and I don't know what to do? Or maybe you could kind of pause the brake on that because I've been here 5 years, I know what I'm doing. So give me some space, whatever it is, right? Or telling a peer that their style of working isn't resonating with you, whatever it is, making it part of the norm is, I think, how you can ease the anxiety that one feels when trying to give feedback. Does that answer your question, Peter?
Yes, thank you very much. That was great. Nice to break it down to the three parts. And I think the other part of this from getting feedback is also to be open to it. As you said, view it as a gift, right? I think that's so important. And often, when I see, especially when we start looking at customer feedback and so on, we will discount it. Oh, they don't really know, they don't really understand, as opposed to saying, well, let us be open and see what they're really saying, right? And what they're talking about. Try to put yourself in the customer's shoes or your coworker's shoes who's giving the feedback to get that perspective. I think is really, really very important to have.
Absolutely.
Hi, this is Nicola. So on the theme of feedback, I 100% agree. Feedback is necessary because teams can't improve if they're not getting feedback. So my question for you is, do you think team size impacts the team's ability to give and receive feedback? And the reason I ask is we're currently seeing teams within my organization that are 20 plus people. And so we know that there is multiple lines of communication there. And so is that also impacting their ability to give and receive feedback?
Without having done a detailed data analysis on it, I'll give you my gut answer. I am a data person, so I like to have data backup. But absolutely, because it ties back to psychological safety, which comes from trust. The larger your group gets, the harder it is to build trust, the harder it is to have open lines of communication. There's a diagram that shows, I don't have it on me right now, but if you had 2 people, it's just one line.
Yes.
If it's 3 people, it's multiple, right?
Yeah.
And as you increase it, it becomes exponentially more complex. That complexity is hard to solve for. So unless you spend a lot of time doing team building and a lot of time building trust, which is generally not the case, there won't be that safety for people to feel comfortable giving and receiving feedback. So absolutely, my hypothesis is that there is an impact on the ability with respect to team size.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
So Rihanna, I have a question. Thinking about these high-performing teams, and you talked about that. So do you think leaders are missing on something when we think about high-performing teams and what we are doing? Is there something there that we're not doing right? Because I find as we go into these organizations, everybody wants those high-performing teams, but they are so hard to achieve.
Great question. Yeah. When I work with leaders, either within, my work at BMO or even outside, as I do my, coaching and my pro bono work or even my consulting work, I find that there is a particular barrier that leaders don't realize they have in most cases. And here's how I'd like to respond to this. As children, we get used to an authority figure, right? Our parents or someone older than us, our teachers, have the answer to everything, or at least they're expected to. And when we grow up, we kind of start expecting that at work. So we expect an authority figure to always have the answer. And unfortunately, the people who are in those leadership positions are now stuck. They're expected to have the answer. So when teams go to them for direction or guidance, for someone to say, I don't know, is just unheard of. I see a little bit of a change in behavior recently, but that was unheard of back in the day. And even today, in many places, that's not something you'd say. So Professor Ron Heifetz from Harvard did a lot of study around this and said, there is a distinct difference between adaptive situations compared to typical scientific situations. So scientific situations, you go through a methodology, you get to a response. Adaptive situations require adaptive leadership. So you have to understand you don't always have the answer, and it's okay. You're in your position not because you have all the answers, but it's because we have faith in you to bring a team together to find the answer. And there's a very distinct difference. High performance teams come from being able to contribute to the answer, not being told what the answer is. And that's what I think leaders today are missing. The idea of adaptive leadership. They're all trying to go for technical leadership, scientific leadership, right? Trying to solve for the perfect, building with the right, angles and the right square footage. That's not how humans work, unfortunately. We're very complex beings. And that's why we pay doctors a lot, right? It's hard for them to figure out what's wrong with us sometimes. So that's, I think, what's missing today. It's the adaptive leadership piece. And I wish if leaders would understand that more, and if teams would understand that more too, right? Not going to the leader for the answer every time, but rather co-creating it. That would, I think, take away the stress and bring in the excitement every time a new challenge comes.
I completely agree. And I think that goes with that safe environment that we keep talking about. So they feel safe that they can actually make a decision or do something and not come to you all the time as a leader to baby or spoon feed them with everything. So I find that stronger leaders educate their team to do that, to be independent, to do it on their own. I have a three-year-old, so I sometimes find myself in front of her and I get so frustrated because she doesn't eat so fast. So my first instinct is to pick up the spoon and just feed her. And then I have to remember that no, she needs to do it at her own pace. And she needs to learn how to do it. And she needs to learn that she needs to finish the plate and all that. So, so it's like that.
Absolutely. You nailed it. Exactly, right? It's like that, right? Like the habits we build in children today affect how they become in workplaces tomorrow. So we have to teach that independence. And some of us have to now unlearn that dependence and get towards that independence, right?
Right. This is great. Thank you.
No problem.
So I mentioned how, about the direction, how important it is. And I know sometimes with Agile projects, we seem we're wandering all over the place because, every time we start a sprint, we go back and update the backlog and take what's the highest priority. So how can you think of it in an Agile environment? How can we help to make sure that we are, in fact, keeping that direction, looking at the big picture and going to there, even though, we occasionally wander a little bit off the path, but we're keeping more or less there and we don't end up taking a sharp right and heading south?
Great question, Peter. Yeah, I think there's multiple facets to that directional piece, right? So one is there has to be somebody or a team working towards figuring out what the direction is, first of all, right? There has to be somebody who owns that. And I think in a lot of the Agile frameworks that comes across as a product owner, right? Somebody who understands where are we headed? Why are we doing this, right? What's the priority in terms of what we're trying to build? So I think having somebody who can own that is very, very important. And the second piece is that direction has to come not just from one source. So for example, a lot of times we find that we get direction from a product perspective, but then we start making or incurring a lot of technical debt. The quality goes down. So ensuring that that direction is a combination of multiple directions. So we need to keep the quality high. We need to meet the customer satisfaction. We have to keep our employees engaged. There's multiple facets to that. So making sure that all those directions come together. Within Agile, they have a simple solution. Have one backlog for everything. There shouldn't be a technical backlog and a product backlog and a backlog of how to manage my employees and a separate backlog for running sprint ceremonies or whatever it is that you're doing in your framework, right? It's just one backlog for everything. And think about who's going to be using the work that you do and use their lens to come to the optimal answer. So I think in Agile, there's actually very clean simple ways of doing things, right? Backlog, having a product owner, and then third, what I talked about earlier around feedback loops. You have to have that feedback to give you that direction and make sure you pivot in the right direction. If it is a strong right that you need to make, then get that feedback so you can be sure, as sure as you can be, about making that change. So I think those are the things I'd say we always see in Agile. And if we do that with discipline, we'll be able to have the right direction for our teams.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points that so first, you mentioned product owners, and of course, New Gen P, we certainly believe that product ownership is so important, and that they're the ones that should be helping keep the focus of the team on moving towards solving customers' problems, delivering value to the customers, and provide that overall direction, not just simply being the voice of the customer, but providing that the direction. And I think, tying that in, understanding that that's as important as achieving your velocity at the mass or the number of team sizes is very important to do. But you also bring in the point, I think, is also that many people forget about, is that the fact that things are changing quickly out there today. And that if we're not keeping an eye on what's going on in the environment, what the competitors are, and we just keep marching forward, by the time we get to where we're going, no one's there because they've moved. So we have to, realizing that we have to change direction accordingly is very appropriate, because if we keep marching, always going to that same direction, we may be missing it, right? So getting the feedback, as you said, is so key to that. Any other questions or any questions anyone else would have that you'd like to ask? Gee, you left us all stunned silence. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, question. In terms of like running teams and that, if you're doing Agile and Scrum, how important do you think it is to have a dedicated Scrum Master versus somebody else, where being a Scrum Master is things that they're doing on top of, say, being a manager or a team lead?
Great question. I get asked that question every day. I think literally every day. I'm not even kidding. I think it's very important, especially for teams that are coming together new, right? If they've never worked in an Agile way before, specifically in the Scrum framework, like if you're really adopting the Scrum framework, it becomes very, very important to have somebody who understands the framework and is able to be the brave, courageous voice to keep the discipline in the team. A lot of times, I've heard, well, we're being Agile, right? Can we be flexible about anything and everything? And I always come back and say, well, would you let a new person drive a car without, getting any training? And usually the answer is no, right? So even if it's somebody else who's maybe taking on the role long term, I strongly believe there is a need to have somebody on the team who can coach that team towards high performance, who can coach that team towards self-organization. I think, I'm not sure if Scrum Guide still says this today, but the last time it was something around how for new teams, you should have somebody full-time. As the teams mature, you could move to a half-time person and eventually to a quarter. But I don't think it ever says you shouldn't have somebody. And that's because we know as humans, we get so bogged down in delivery that continuous improvement takes a back seat, right? How many teams have you worked with where they'll say, can we not do the retro this time? I'm really busy with delivery. It's the first ceremony that goes away in the backlog and takes a D priority, right? So I think having somebody there who can be that strong voice, who can come ahead and say, no, we need to sit down and reflect as a team. If we're so busy that we don't even have time to continuously improve, that's a problem we got to talk about. We have to find a way to work together and have the ability to continuously improve. And if we're not doing that, we're going to become stale and stagnant, right? So I find that it's extremely important to have somebody there for more time when a new team starts. And then eventually you can have somebody who's maybe a little bit less dedicated to just one team and has different teams that they're working with. Should they be doing multiple roles? Normally, I wouldn't recommend it. I know a lot of teams do that because of financial pressures. I don't recommend it. I'd rather have one Scrum Master working across two teams than have the Scrum Master and the developer or the Scrum Master and the PO be the same person, because the conflict of interest makes you, again, deprioritize continuous improvement to a high degree. So that would be my 2 cents. Joanna and Peter, if you'd like to add anything, feel free.
Yeah, no, I think you nailed it. And I think it's, from a Scrum Master perspective and having the role there helps. One thing that I don't agree with is having layers and layers of roles, like Scrum Master and Senior Scrum Master and Agile Coach and all those roles that I think introduce more complexity and more handoffs. And I think this is something that we feel that we need to have in order to support the team. We need to put yet another management role in the team to speed up things. And I think that could be an interesting discussion to have as a follow-up, to think about how many management roles do you actually need in order to have teams deliver faster and get more speed. Because at the end of the day, management roles don't actually do the work. They do the directional piece. So, that would be something to think about.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think it's great. We have to wrap it up, and I really appreciate your presentation, Ariana. I think it was great and really inspiring. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again. We are definitely, we are excited to hear from you again and have other presentations here. So let's continue the discussion. We will post something on LinkedIn as well. So I would appreciate if everyone here feels, that they can contribute, and we can definitely engage in the conversation and continue more with this topic about organizational physics, because I think it's important for organizations to understand how to do things. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, well, thank you, Rihanna, and thank you everyone for attending as well. So just as a reminder, if you want to know more about product ownership, or for that point, how to introduce Agile, we have a course on our website, newgenp.com, which we have 8 modules for our product owner course. Do a module a week, 8 weeks. Each module has 4 sections that we have with a template that Joanna and I will review and give you feedback on. Plus, we have regular meetings, and at the end, you'll get a certificate from us, as well as a certification, a badge. And of course, if you're interested in PDUs, which I always seem to be, you can get PDUs as well. For this course, since we're into Black Friday, Cyber Monday, then we've got a special offer, about 60% off the list of the course for both our courses. So the product owner course is going for 199 Canadian, and the starting Agile for 80 Canadian. You can search the QR codes here, or just scan them and they'll take you right to the site. Or if you want to know more about the courses, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we'd be more than glad to discuss them with you. And just on that point, to contact us is info@newgenp.com. You can visit our website, newgenp.com, as well. And also just check our website. We're planning our next webinar right now for Friday, December 11th. Seems so far away, but it will come very quickly. So with that, thank you very much for attending. Please keep in touch with us, and have a great weekend. Enjoy the nice weather.